there are certain patterns we do not question at all. And that's like, do we treat women and men the same way? And is that correct?
You're a cardiologist, someone who's trained to see patterns, structure, and precision. Can you maybe take us back to the moment when you first realized something is wrong, the science doesn't match the women I'm treating? Cardiologists are trained to look for patterns, but sometimes the pattern everyone relied on was incomplete. This is Professor Carolin, cardiologist, researcher, Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital trained clinician scientist.
So it really took me a little bit also into my clinical and scientific career to realize, maybe it makes really sense to take a closer look. And I would say that was in Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital. And I learned a lot from them and just the surroundings, that being so normal and natural that this was necessary.
Today, she's taking us inside one of the most important blind spots in modern medicine: how hormonal biology, the fluctuations, transitions, and shifts that every woman experiences directly shape the cardiovascular system.
Cardiovascular diseases are the number one killer for both men and women, really globally also. And many women are not even aware that this is the likely cause of death for them.
I'm Marianne Self. This is Blind Spot Capital. Let's talk about how hormones shape the heart. Some investments chase returns, others shift reality. Welcome to Blind Spot Capital, the show where we trace the capital flows, structural decisions, and invisible forces shaping the future of health. Professor Carolin is one of the most important voices in modern cardiology, not just because of what she studies, but because of what she's willing to question. Today, we're talking about hormones, the heart, and the blind spots that cost lives. Carolin, you're a cardiologist, someone who's trained to see patterns, structure, and precision. Can you maybe take us back to the moment when you first realized something is wrong, the science doesn't match the women I'm treating?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think also it took a little while for me, growing up in the system that is as it is. I also wasn't really taught to question everything, which is interesting because I think we're all raised as scientists and, in medicine, we are also taught to question, but there are certain patterns we do not question at all. And that's like, do we treat women and men the same way, and is that correct, or should we treat them differently, and so on and so forth. So it really took me a little bit also into my clinical and scientific career to realize, maybe it makes really sense to take a closer look. And I would say that was in Boston. I was doing my postdoctoral research years there, and at the Massachusetts General Hospital, there was a women's heart center. They were really also nowadays, those are the women that were heading that center. Also, it's still at the forefront of research and clinical care for women's heart health. And I learned a lot from them and just the surroundings and then that being so normal and natural that this was necessary. So we also looked a little bit more into, basic science research into that area. And then I think that really sparked the interest. But it also got a little bit toned down again when I came back to Germany, where I think people were not quite ready yet to see it as so important.
So do you remember maybe a specific patient who changed the way you saw things?
I'm trained a basic scientist, so really looking into what happens in the cell, and in the heart as a really in terms of what's in the heart muscle cell, what's in the vascular cell, what's happening there. And I think what I remember, what really sparked my interest was a project of a colleague who looked into the patterns from a heart failure that occurs during pregnancy or shortly after pregnancy, and similar patterns that also happen in preeclampsia, meaning patients that have gestational hypertension and proteinuria and so on and so forth. We I think most of us have heard that term already, and we found that there's certain signals that come from the placenta and actually signal to the heart and then have some effects on the heart muscle cells that we weren't aware of. And I think that really intrigued me. It's like, okay, there's some differences, there's similar patterns, but we haven't really looked at it right now. And there's something to it also therapeutically that we should check.
That's so interesting. So I think you've talked about heart failure during pregnancy. So I want to talk about hormones because we know during pregnancy there's a lot going on with hormones there. So when we speak about hormones, changing the heart, for example, during pregnancy, what does that mean? I mean, if we had to explain this to a non-medical listener, this is what estrogen does, this is what testosterone does. How would you describe that?
I mean, that's really complex. We can have a whole lecture about that. But I think I would just challenge you in thinking like what does the body, what changes does the body have to undergo to maintain a healthy pregnancy? And that's quite a lot, right? It starts from the beginning where, the whole sort of the uterus needs to be prepared in order to even, have the egg being implanted and the fetus develop. But for the heart, that means pretty immediately we need more blood supply to the uterus. That is an organ that needs to now grow dramatically. We need to grow a placenta. Through that placenta, we need to really support that, just starting life with blood. We need to supply. So I think really from the get go, it means that the heart needs to adjust, and that's. Not only through the heart itself that sort of has to pump more blood per minute in a way, but also other hormones that say that make the placenta being relaxed to keep the pregnancy. There's hormones that then also have effects on the heart because that's not local. It's not just local in everything that's happening in the belly, but that affects the whole body. That's why we all notice, we are a little bit more flexible during pregnancy, and
Yes.
we hurt ourselves a little bit more joints because that's all because of that. It's meant to maintain the pregnancy and a healthy pregnancy, but it affects the whole body, and that also means it affects the heart.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about pregnancy. I want to talk about the other shifts that women have, which is
Mhm.
quite crucial, menopause. And
Yes.
menopause is a seismic shift. What happens in the heart during that transition that maybe most clinicians who are not focusing on, say, precision medicine miss?
Yeah. Not even the precision part. We have to start even before because we often miss that these
Mm-hmm.
changes are so dramatic in a woman's life for the heart, especially, and it's really a window of opportunity for us to be really early when we think about prevention and precision. So we often talk about the differences, in the symptoms in women experiencing a heart attack. But what we really want, I think, in a precision and individualized medicine is that we prevent this to even happen. And then I think we have to start much earlier. And I want to go back to the pregnancy here as well, because that's
Mm-hmm.
also a window of opportunity. As I said, a person that had gestational hypertension, meaning high blood pressure during pregnancy, or diabetes during pregnancy, or preeclampsia, are sort of have an elevated risk to develop cardiovascular diseases later in life. So it absolutely makes sense to have a very careful eye on these patients as well. And then menopause is sort of the second window of opportunity where really the estrogen levels usually drop.
Mm-hmm.
And in menopause, they go up and down, up and down. Most of us also experience that really drastically. But then menopause really means the estrogen levels are much lower than in the years before, and that means that we have the positive effects of estrogen are not there anymore. And estrogen usually has many different effects. I would say we don't know most of them yet, but just in general, we say that, it helps to dilate the blood vessels a little bit. It keeps the blood pressure in check in women. It also actually helps to reduce plaque formation. So, there's no buildup of blocked arteries and so on and so forth. It helps to maintain cholesterol levels. So that's why in premenopausal women usually have a lower risk compared to men. But then they catch up pretty quickly. And so, with the lower estrogen, and that's where we really need to take a close look and make sure that we're early when we want to prevent cardiovascular diseases.
Yeah. So if people only knew this one fact about women's hearts, everything would change. What would you say that is?
I think that's pretty much what we've just said, I would say. I think the crucial part here is not even thinking about the differences in disease development and symptoms and onset of disease and so on, treatment, but really the preventive care. So I would say if we would had a very scheduled policy for prevention for cardiovascular disease in women, then that would be a huge lever. You know, cardiovascular diseases are the number one killer for both men and women,
Yes.
really globally also. And that's something we have to keep in mind. And many women are not even aware that, this is the likely cause of death for them. So
Yes.
so if we have a very systematic prevention in place, then this would be a huge deal.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, we know that much of modern medicine has been built on male baselines. So it's incredible to hear how much biology we call noise or atypical simply because it belongs to women.
Yeah.
And I think talking about women and the hormones, when we ignore hormonal biology in cardiology, I want to talk about the cost. What is the cost for patients, for healthcare systems, for outcomes?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we already know how high the cost is. I'll
Mhm,
give you an example of a patient that young woman who said that she feels like tachycardia is very like racing heart,
mhm,
and she feels this always right before her period comes. And, it was very serious for her. She got really dizzy and so on and so forth. So she actually was transferred to an electrophysiology diagnostic. It was very like an invasive test to see where in the heart is that arrhythmia coming from.
mhm.
Can we maybe even block it? There's a way to ablate it, so make sure that it's not happening anymore. So just isolate that part in the heart where it comes from. But it's an invasive test. And I think she had undergone this a couple of times. My colleague had seen her and at some point said, well, but this woman keeps saying that it's only happening before her period. And during all these diagnostic tests, they were never able to reproduce that arrhythmia. And then eventually they did it in this time frame when the woman had said it's always happening right before her period, when estrogen levels go down. And then they were able to see it, to isolate it, and then she never had it again. And I think, this is just an example of how just listening and taking these things serious can really have a huge impact.
Yeah.
And so we need to understand this better because this is an example, menstrual cycle dependent arrhythmias where we know it's a thing, but we don't really know the numbers that well. And we think it's underdiagnosed in many instances. So we need to study it. We need to have registries. We need to see, how often does this actually occur? And then we can sort of slowly build the knowledge and distribute the knowledge.
So why, and you talk about the facts that there's still a lot that we don't know. But if I think back to 1993, which is when the FDA sort of mandated that women should be included in clinical trials, why do we still not know so much about women's hearts?
I think the key word here is should. And yeah, it might make things more complicated if you think about this in a shorter term. You have to include women. You maybe have to think about, are they premenopausal? Are they postmenopausal? Is the group very heterogeneous? And it makes
Mhm.
it more difficult to draw conclusions. So I think very slowly we're getting to a point where we see, no, it's actually necessary. But what we don't want is to maybe develop a new medication
Mhm.
that we then have to take off market again because, side effects are too high in women because we've never tested it and we didn't look at it in a sex disaggregated way or gender disaggregated way. But, these things, the transition usually take a lot of time. And also, I mean, as a scientist, I would also caution a little bit, we're never done
Mhm.
researching, right? There's always, we learn one more thing and then we feel like this, okay, but we have never looked at the next thing. And, now we have to go a level
Mhm.
deeper. So I don't think we'll ever say, oh, now we know enough. Like, no, but it's a progress.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, what areas of cardiovascular research are catching up?
We ourselves have just looked at the data and looked at, how many women are actually included in cardiovascular clinical trials and how is are sex and gender differences reported. And I can report that we do see a little bit of improvement overall.
Mm,
By that, I have to say also we often don't mean parity. We have to look a little bit of like how often is this disease actually like in the general population, how many women, how many men are affected, and then sort of we want a little bit of a balance in clinical trials that represent the disease and the population.
mm-hmm,
See that this is getting a little bit better. Where we feel there's still a huge missed opportunity is then the reporting of sex or gender differences.
mm-hmm,
And in our own analysis, we've seen that this is still barely done. And for example, in ischemic heart disease, meaning heart attacks, everything that comes with it, coronary artery disease, and heart failure, particularly, there's still an undermention of sex or gender differences, or just mention that what are the results if I look at this separately.
mm-hmm.
Even if there's no difference, an important fact for us, right? So we can
Yeah.
go ahead and take that knowledge into the next stages. So I think there's improvement seen, but we are lacking behind a little bit still, unfortunately.
So, if you could redesign cardiology from scratch, with say hormones at the center, it's blue sky. What would that system look like? So, what would a hormone literate health system or cardiovascular health system look like?
Yeah, so hormone literate, I think for me means that we consider the patient individually at the stage in their lives, right? I think
Mm,
that's the more crucial part. I'm not even sure if the hormones alone are the major. It's all like the body is more complex than just
mm-hmm,
picking out the hormones and saying that's now guiding everything. I think there's many different areas that we have to look at. For example, heart muscle cells have receptors for hormones, right? So the cell needs to have a sensor for the hormone, for example. Like the
mm-hmm,
hormone comes, the cell needs to recognize it and then translates the signal from that hormone into the cell.
mm-hmm,
There might be that in different parts of the heart, even these receptors have a different density depending on the phase in your life. So it's not just the hormone concentration we can
mm,
measure in the blood. We also need to see how receptive is the cell to that hormone at
mm.
different stages in life. So I think I don't think I can answer this question because I truly feel we don't even know enough,
No.
but we need to learn more and need to take it into consideration more and more. And
Mm,
really, we are not arguing against individualized and personalized medicine. And I think this is just a very crucial part. I've just heard a gynecologic endocrinologist colleague speaking recently, and she said we don't even know what the normal ranges of hormone fluctuations in perimenopause or menopause are. We have never really checked systematically. So, as long as we don't know that, how do we even define, what's normal, what's
yes.
not, what does it affect or not? So, I think, yeah, I'm sorry for not being more straightforward, but
Uh,
as the clinician and scientist here, I would just say yeah, we need more information.
yes. And I think that that is a stance. We need more information. So that is an answer. Um, where do you see your boldest prediction for the future of gender informed medicine?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we also make sure we transport that message that this is not only a women's heart problem. I think that's for me. I mean, I'm the chair for gender medicine, sex and gender sensitive medicine. So for me, it's important. While in my clinical life, I'm mostly caring for women in a women's heart health program because here's where we see the really the care gap. But I think more broadly, we also need to understand what are the other hormones doing. For the heart, testosterone is also important. Thyroid hormones are really important. Insulin. There's other
Mm,
hormones that I think are very cortisol, we all know
Mm,
how much stress can affect heart health. So cortisol levels are really important to consider as well. So there's more hormones than estrogen that are affecting the heart and heart health specifically.
mhm,
And also here we need to learn more and more. But yeah, I think it's important for me to say that this is not only a women's problem. This is a problem for everyone, and the more we know, the better for everyone. The more individualized we can actually care. So the more we learn about estrogens in the heart, the more we can then reflect also on men and see, what does it do in their heart, because men have estrogens in their blood, right? And how is it important or
mm,
not? What does it affect? Is it differently? Are the receptors different? All of these things. So I think that
mm.
will eventually help everyone.
Mm. I love that you say that because it's something that I talk about myself quite a bit. When we think about women's health, it's really it's almost a misnomer because it's the way I see it as well is I see it as health for all, is human health because at the end of the day we're talking about individualized precision
Yep.
medicine for that works for everyone. And yeah, so I fully share that view and I love that you
Yeah.
said that. So, Carolyn, I think if I kind of think back, the one question I want to ask you right now is what gives you the most hope right now?
I mean, I think right now we do see that these topics get more and more recognition, and I'm also often
Mm,
asked whether we get a lot of backlash because, geopolitical and the word gender and so on and so forth. But I would really say, luckily, I can report that it's much more positive than negative what we're experiencing. And I think what gives me a lot of hope is that for women's heart health, for example, I see more and more women, coming up and saying, I'm demanding that care. I'm demanding that people look at me individually as a woman with, maybe a family history of cardiovascular diseases. I want to be taken care of early. I want to take all the preventive measures. That
mm,
gives me a lot of hope. And also, I'm very active, national medical, like professional societies, like the Swiss Cardiac Society or the German Cardiac Society, also the European Society of Cardiology that has a lot of power. And I'm in the task force core team that looks at, sex and gender and cardiology, both actually for the workforce, women in
mm,
cardiology, but also, of course, the patients and women's heart health. And I think we're right now driving a lot of very important projects that will have influence internationally, for sure in Europe, but hopefully also
mm,
internationally. And the same is happening in the US, actually, still with the very, very good and active people heading the American Heart Association or the American College of Cardiology and so on. So I think we're still really taking good big steps forward. And that gives me a lot of hope that this is going to be a more regular, normal way of thinking and caring for patients.
mm. And what role should industry, and when I say industry, I mean life sciences, and also investors, what role should these two stakeholders play?
I mean, I think they're crucial, right? Because we need the attention to the field also because we need money. And if,
Mm,
research, we run a wet lab, a basic science lab. It's just incredibly expensive,
mm,
to do experiments, to do it often takes many years. And then our outcome is usually a publication, and that's how we're measured. And with sort of the public funding cutting back and back more and more, not just for our topic, but in general, I think it's important that we get the attention from the policy and also other stakeholders like the industry, as you said, that invest in our field and are interested in the new developments that are coming up and see the opportunities that arise from that. There's a few examples like where women are just simply underserved right now. And I
mm,
think doesn't make sense for the industry at all. For example, there's a device in the heart that makes sure that both of the chambers of the heart are pumping symmetrically, so at the same
mhm,
time. And sometimes in heart failure, when there's certain conditions that sort of They're a little asymmetric, and it actually costs a few, a little bit of horsepower, I would say, for the heart to pump if it's not symmetric.
Mm-hmm.
We do know that many women benefit a lot, but they're just underserved. They don't get the device as much, so they're
Mm.
referred. So I think in that specific instance, for the med tech companies that produce such devices, there's still a market there that's underserved for no obvious reason. The access is there and so on and so forth, especially in the countries that we live in.
Mm.
And other things that as well, we see that for cholesterol levels, we often don't reach the targets because we don't offer the women the medications, or we tighter them up too quickly, and then they have more side effects. A few things where just a care for women
Mm.
specifically, and just the guidelines that we have right now would even be an opportunity.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Carolyn. I think I will take away the what is keeping you optimistic, which is the fact that it's moving in the right direction. Women, more and more women are speaking up, they're asking for care, and the vibes and the feedback you are getting across the board is more positive than negative. And I think also when I think about the projects that you are working on as part of the Cardiology Society within Switzerland and broader Europe as well. The future is bright for women's heart health. Would I summarize that correctly?
I tend to be optimistic in that sense, and yes, I would fully sign that, and I hope I'm right.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for your clarity, for your courage, and also for the work that you're doing to rewrite the future of cardiovascular care. I mean, for me, conversations like this really remind us that medicine doesn't fail because we lack knowledge. It's when we look away from the places that we should be looking into.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your support.
You're very welcome. And to our listeners, if this episode resonated with you, if it made you rethink what you thought you knew about women's health, about hormones, male and female hormones, about your own body, then share it with somebody who needs to hear it. You can find the full episode, the show notes, and all our work on gender specific health innovation at Blind Spot Capital and Fem Health Alliance. And as always, thank you so much for being part of this community that believes that science can be better, that innovation can be bolder, and care can finally be built for everyone. I'm Marianne Self. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Blind Spot Capital. If you learned something, share it. And if you're building something, reach out. And if you're investing in the future, make sure you're not doing it blind.